Dear fellow humans, capitalism is bullshit. You know what I'm talking about when you think about these questions. Why do I have to pay for public education and health services? Why can my boss fire me, but I cannot fire my boss? If my employer makes a profit from my work, why do I get paid a salary instead of a share of the profit? Why is my only choice to quit my job and be a slave at another employer that plays by the same rules? Since we are supposed to live in a meritocracy, why don't I have the job I deserve based on my merit? If we have a free market, why do some companies and banks get billions of dollars from the government and I don't get anything? I have been working really hard. Why can I not get rich and have my own mansion? Why is the planet burning and governments do not do anything substantial about it? The list of questions is endless. Capitalism as an economic system has become so embedded in our society that almost all material questions about our lives have something to do with the lies we have been told about capitalism. In this episode, I will go over some of these big lies, unpack them, and give you a tool to understand better the world we live in. This list is inspired by the book 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism by Ha-Joon Chang, published in 2010, which I have updated with recent data and my own contribution. In future episodes, I will delve into more detail about these ideas and we will build back a toolkit on how we can fight back and reclaim planet Earth for us, the regular people. The first lie. We have free markets. There's a deeply ingrained notion in capitalist ideology that markets are unique to capitalism. They are presumed to be the bedrock on which everything else moves in the economy. Without markets, there is no capitalism, and capitalism cannot exist without markets. These markets, whether they are the stock market, the commodities market, the real estate market, the labor market, they have a very strong built-in requirement to be free. That means only the people acting on their own or representing a corporation must have the freedom to interact with each other on the market according to their desires and interests for the purpose of an exchange of goods and services. This freedom must be unaffected by the control of anybody outside the market. The truth is that markets existed for a long time before capitalism. Ancient Rome had markets of slaves. The socialist Soviet Union had markets. Many other non-capitalist societies had markets. The free from free market belongs to a concept of freedom that has evolved throughout history and continues to evolve. Until the early 1800s, employers were perfectly free to have children younger than 9 working more than 10 hours a day, often under atrocious conditions. Fortunately, in 1819, the British Parliament passed a law that banned the employment of children under the age of 9. Older children from 10 to 16 would still be allowed to work, but only to a maximum of 12 hours a day. They were so gentle on those children. This practice would be inconceivable today. Or take other examples. There's no free market to sell cars that pollute over a limit. Remember the Volkswagen emission scandal from 2015? There's no free market for narcotic drugs, human organs, firearms, electoral votes, university places, slaves, licenses to practice medicine or law, or buying citizenship. These are the best examples showing that 100% free markets are not desirable. If markets are supposed to be free, why did governments intervene and bailed out banks and corporations? Why did governments not bail out people when they lost their jobs or their houses? The second lie. Companies create value for society, not their owners. The first capitalist mega corporations, founded in the 1600s, like the Dutch East India Company and its rival, the British East India Company, operated on the principle that they created value of national interest for the benefit of society. Fast forward to 2021, Every single corporation claims to have the same grand purpose of serving society and the common good. Apple, Microsoft, Saudi Aramco, Alphabet, Amazon, Tesla, Meta platforms. They all exist to advance the well-being of humanity. One of these companies claimed to have a customer obsession. Guess which one? The truth is companies exist to make a quick profit for their shareholders. That's it. No sophistication, no great noble ideal. Just profit and as quickly as possible. Jack Welch, the chairman of General Electric, said in 1981 that his company must be focused on increasing shareholder value. That means more profit for its owners. This was the dumbest idea in the world. In 2009, General Motors went bankrupt after maximizing shareholder value for years, following Jack Welch's philosophy. And who said it was the dumbest idea in the world? Jack Welch himself in March 2009. The third lie: workers are paid according to their productivity. According to payscale.com, a software developer makes around $70,000 per year in America in 2021. Let's call him John. A similar software developer in India makes an equivalent of $6,700 per year. Let's call him Rajesh. Capitalism claims that John is paid more because he's more productive than Rajesh. John creates more value for his employer than Rajesh does for his employer. Or do they? Is John really 10 times more productive than Rajesh? Does he type computer code 10 times faster? Does he know 10 times more algorithms and programming languages than Rajesh? The truth is John makes 10 times more than Rajesh because of immigration control. Rajesh and millions like him cannot freely move to the West to get paid like John for exactly the same job because the countries in the West are protecting themselves really hard against the massive influx of workers. Obviously, massive immigration cannot happen because of issues like language barriers, national identity, and limited capacity of countries to absorb immigrants. On top of that, outsourcing is a way of capitalism to transfer the exploitation of labor from a rich country to a poor country. Capitalists pay Rajesh 10 times less, but the result of Rajesh's work is sold not in India, but in America and other rich countries at much higher prices that it could be sold in Rajesh's country. Who pockets the difference? The owner of capital. In other words, workers are paid according to the price of their labor in the places where they live. They are not paid according to the market price of the products they make. Let us not forget that net productivity in America increased from 1948 to 2013 by 243%, while wages increased only by 109%, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Who pocketed the difference? Again, the owners of capital, of course. The fourth lie: the internet is the best thing that happened to humanity. Capitalism has succeeded in convincing us that the internet has connected the world, brought people together, and made life better. Capitalism needs the internet to grow even more, even faster, with even less restrictions for the benefit of us all. The truth is that when the washing machine and other household appliances were introduced, they had a profound effect in transforming society as much as the internet did. These tools vastly reduced the amount of work needed at home and allowed women to enter the labor market. While the internet certainly allowed some of us to work from home, it did not make us 20 times happier when we switched from a 4G to a 5G network. The problem is not that the internet is not great. It is. The problem is that capitalism has fetishized the internet. It turned it into a wet dream at the expense of many other things that actually matter more, like fresh air, clean water, healthy food, hugging each other and laughing together in our free time. And what's worst about the internet is that it allowed the invention of surveillance capitalism. It's the system where big tech wants to know everything about us. They want to completely eliminate business risk and replace civic democracy with the rule of corporations. The fifth lie. People are inherently selfish. Milton Friedman, one of the fathers of today's capitalist model, famously said,
"When you see around the globe the maldistribution of wealth, the desperate plight of millions of people in underdeveloped countries, when you see so few haves and so many have-nots, when you see the greed and the concentration of power within, did you ever have a moment of doubt about capitalism and whether greed's a good idea to run on?"
Well, first of all, tell me, is there some society you know that doesn't run on greed? You think Russia doesn't run on greed? You think China doesn't run on greed? What is greed? Of course, none of us are greedy. It's only the other fellow who's greedy.
what he meant was that you act according to your interests because only you know what is best for you. That makes you selfish. Communism failed because it denied this alleged reality. That's why capitalism tells you we have to assume the worst in people if we want to build a prosperous society. The truth is, material self-interest is not the only motivation that matters. There are many others: altruism, duty, egalitarianism, faith, honesty, love, loyalty, self-esteem, solidarity, sympathy, and many more. Think about how employers conduct their business. They do not have to spell out every single task the workers need to perform. They rely on the selfless self-motivation of workers that they perform their work to the benefit of the company. And now think about this. Imagine the power the workers have if they worked strictly what was written on a list of tasks, but nothing more. No initiative, no extra hours. This is known to reduce output by 30 to 50%. It's called an Italian strike, sciopero bianco, white strike as Italians call it. That's an enormous power the workers have. The capitalist class knows it. That's why employers rarely spell out in detail every single task workers need to perform. The sixth lie. We need to have low inflation in order to have stability. Since the 1980s, economists like Stanley Fischer have convinced the world that capitalism needs a very low inflation at around 1 to 3% in order to have economic stability and prosperity. Remember, inflation is the general increase of the prices of many goods and services on average year over year. These economists say low inflation allows businesses to borrow cheap money and invest more, therefore growing the economy. The truth is, according to studies, inflation below 10% has no influence on a country's economic growth. These studies have come out from the same free market economists associated with the University of Chicago and the International Monetary Fund. Moreover, for the past 20 years, inflation has been tamed and kept very low in all rich countries, from an average of 4% in 2000 to 1.4% in 2020. At the same time, capitalism went through three major severe shocks: the dot-com bubble of 2000, the 2008 financial crash, and the 2020 recession caused by the pandemic. Trillions of dollars, euros, and other currencies have been pumped into the global economy. According to free market economists, when the amount of money in an economy goes up, the prices should go up too. That never happened. The money did not go into prices but went into the pockets of shareholders. Inflation, however, is making now a comeback in some rich countries. A very likely cause is the clogging up of supply chains, not governments printing money. We are still in the middle of it, and we are still far away from stability. The seventh lie. Poor countries must have free markets to get rich. Since the end of colonialism, poor countries have been told that they had to open their markets to foreign investments. They were told they had to make expensive loans from the World Bank or the IMF to grow their economies. The first truth is wealthy countries have grown the most exactly when they protected their economies against principle of free markets. Take America. Alexander Hamilton, in 1791, writes in the Report on the Subject of Manufacturers that governments must protect industries in their infancies. He meant trade protectionism. Abraham Lincoln, a well-known protectionist, raised tariffs to their highest level ever. Ulysses Grant said that America will adopt free trade in 200 years. Under Andrew Jackson, industrial tariffs were 35 to 50%. Britain adopted free trade only in the 1860s after having its greatest rise while being one of the most protectionist countries in the world from the 1720s to the 1850s. The second truth is poor countries did reasonably well under times of protectionism in the 1960s and 1970s. When the rich countries forced them to open their economies, their growth rates dropped from 3% to 1.7% after 1980. Today, some 4 billion people live in debilitating poverty, living under $5 per day. Where are the riches they were promised by capitalism? The eighth lie. Capital has become global. Globalization has made a hero out of the multinational corporations. They operate in multiple countries and can move their operations wherever they find the best market conditions. If a country's government discriminates against them, the multinational corporation will not invest in that country. The truth is, multinational corporations are actually national corporations with international operations. That is why on Apple products you see designed in California while production is in China. If you trace back the flow of capital inside multinational corporations, it will always trace back to an original country where the board of directors sits. The ownership of many multinationals resembles often the layers of an onion, layer upon layer of holding companies and hedge funds. But at the core of the onion, there's always one person or a group of people, humans, not companies, and humans are not global. The ninth lie. We consume more services than things. We are told manufacturing has declined and we live in a knowledge-based economy driven by services. We are told we buy and need less things today. All these are reasons for celebration. The truth is that according to the World Bank data, industrial production in all countries was 34% of GDP in 1994 and dropped to 26% of GDP in 2019. This apparent deindustrialization of only 8% during the fast rise of the internet age was not due to the fall of an absolute quantity of manufactured goods produced, but due to the fall in their prices relative to those for services. And this is because the productivity of the service sector increased much faster than the productivity of the industry. It looks as if we are spending more money on services than goods these days, not because we are consuming more services than before, but mainly because services have become more expensive in relative terms. During the COVID pandemic, the consumption of goods has exploded compared to the consumption of services. It appears we are getting more goods for the same money, while services, whatever available, have become more expensive. We are consuming more goods and less services than before, as proportion of our incomes. We are not making progress towards a post-industrial service-based economy. Gadgets, accessories, billions of useless things are here to stay and multiply. We have very few years to turn this around. We are lied to that we consume less things than a generation before. It cannot be further from the truth. The 10th lie. America has the highest standard of living in the world. The GDP of the USA set around $20 trillion in 2020. That is the highest in the world. In second place is China with about 16 trillion. However, when you divide that amount by the number of people you get, very different ratios. That's about $68,000 per person in America and $12,000 per person in China. There are other countries with even higher GDP per capita like Norway, Ireland, Switzerland, but Americans can allegedly buy more goods with their dollars than other people living in other rich countries. The truth is America may be rich in terms of total GDP, but that wealth is insanely polarized. The levels of income and wealth distribution in America today are enormous. In 2021, the income of the bottom 50% of Americans was 13% of total national income, while income of the top 1% of Americans was 18% of the national income. Think that again. The 1% are earning more than the bottom 50%. 3 million Americans make more money every year than 166 million of their fellow citizens. In future videos, we will discuss why this is so important. It is crucial to look at numbers in different ways. If you want to know where you stand in your country, go to wid.world/simulator. If you look at other data, such as life expectancy at birth, America is on the 40th place in the world. At infant mortality, 47th place. Obesity, 12th place. Here, you don't want to be first. Happiness, 18th place. Here, you do want to be first. Does this mean money does not buy happiness? Wow, who knew? The 11th lie. Africa is destined to be underdeveloped forever. Capitalists tell us that Africa has a bad climate, tropical diseases, bad geography, many landlocked countries, too many natural resources which make people lazy, corrupt governments, ethnic and tribal divisions, bad institutions, cultures incompatible with the 21st century market economy. First truth is rich countries went through similar conditions in their history of growth. They overcame harsh climates, major conflicts, severe pandemics. They are doing quite well today, all things considered. National stereotypes evolved too. Until the early 20th century, the Japanese were considered lazy by Australians and Americans. Until 1950s, Germans were considered stupid, individualist, emotional by the British. These stereotypes changed as those countries developed economically. Second truth is in the 1960s and 1970s, Africa had decent growth of income per capita at around 1.6%. That's similar to what rich countries have today, until something happened. The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund intervened on behalf of global capital. They came up with a thing called Structural Adjustment Programs, SAP, which is a fancy way of saying adjust your country so multinationals could come in, harvest your resources, sell you their expensive stuff, and keep you poor and under control. These programs did not want Africa to grow and become a strong competitor to rich multinationals. Africa is maintained poor on purpose. That is a strong statement. Africa is not allowed to catch up with the global north. In 2012, poor countries have received $2 trillion in so-called aid, investment, and income from abroad. But in the same year, 5 trillion went out of those countries. It is Africa and the rest of the developing countries that is aiding the rich countries, not the opposite. The 12th lie. Governments do not pick who wins or who loses at capitalism. You hear often that governments are incapable and inefficient at running businesses. The Soviet Union and former communist countries are given as examples. Whenever a government intervenes in controlling companies, it is a disaster. The truth is governments can pick both winners and losers all the time. In 1965, the government of then poor country Korea made a plan to build an integrated steel mill headed by a general with no business experience. Korea had virtually no iron ore, or coal, the ingredients for making steel. It asked the World Bank, the US, the UK, Germany, France, and Italy for investment. They all declined. In the end, Japan pitched in a share from reparation payments it was paying for its colonial rule that lasted from 1910 to 1945. Steel production started in 1973. Today it is the fourth largest steelmaker by quantity of output. Another winner was the LG Group. The government banned the company to enter the textile industry and forced it to enter the electric cable industry. Another winner was Hyundai, who was forced by the government to start a shipbuilding company, which is one of the biggest in the world today. How about Tesla? Its success story is also largely due to a $450 million loan granted federally in 2010, which was indeed paid back. As of 2021, Tesla's today's subsidy value is $2.44 billion across 82 federal grants and tax credits, as well as 28 state and local awards. How much did you get from the government to start your own electric car company? According to Good Jobs First Center, there are 705,000 subsidies awarded to 2,958 companies in America as of 2021. But governments pick losers too, in no any better or worse than companies themselves. Remember the supersonic airliner Concorde that operated from 1976 to 2003? It was shut down after huge losses. Talking about the government not getting involved in business. The 13th lie. When the rich get richer, we also get richer. Capitalism has been shouting this big lie for decades, that if we allow the rich to get richer, they will use their wealth to create jobs, create economic activity, and thus making all of us richer in the process. This is known as trickle-down economics. You must have heard about it by now. The truth is quite shocking. Have you heard of a guy named Yevgeny Preobrazhensky? He was a Russian revolutionary, a Bolshevik. After the devastation of the First World War, when he saw the deplorable state of the Soviet economy, he came up with the radical idea to abolish all private property in the countryside and take all surplus from the farmers, give it to the state so the state can build and invest in industries. This was considered too radical by opposing factions of the Bolsheviks, and he was exiled in 1927. In 1928, everything changed. Stalin was now the supreme leader. He decides the ideas of Preobrazhensky were not so bad after all. He took almost everything from the farmers and invested in industry. The cost was very high. In 1932-33, millions of people died in a severe famine. How is this related to our today's Musk, Bezos, Gates, Arnault, Zuckerberg, Buffett, and their fellow capitalists? Just like Stalin and Preobrazhensky, these guys believed the surplus should be concentrated in the hands of the investor, which today is the capitalist class, and during Stalin's time it was the planning state authority. So yes, our billionaires are Stalinists, and just like Russian farmers from the 1930s, we are not getting richer and nothing trickles down. The 14th lie. Top managers are paid what they deserve. We are told the so-called labor market is free, so in order to retain very talented managers and executives, companies must pay them large sums of money. Companies make profits only because the geniuses in charge are extremely smart and competent, so they deserve to get paid a lot. The truth is that, especially in America, top managers are extremely overpaid. In 2019, CEO compensation was very high relative to typical worker compensation by a ratio of 278 to 1. If the worker made $30,000 per year, the CEO made $8.3 million per year on average. In contrast, the CEO to typical worker compensation ratio was 20 to 1 in 1965 and 58 to 1 in 1989. Average pay of CEOs at the top 350 firms in 2018 was $17.2 million. CEO pay rose 14.1% in 2020 from 2019, while median worker pay ticketed up 1.9% during the same period. The highest paid CEO was Alexander Karp of data company Palantir, who took home $1.1 billion in 1 year. In no way these outrageous amounts justify an increase in intelligence, competence, and merit of over more than 10 times in 60 years. CEOs do not have today an IQ of 1,000 and do not work 80 hours every day. The market is incapable of determining the true value of merit for the performance of a CEO. They get paid so much only because the boards of these companies have the absolute power, undemocratic, unchecked, and totalitarian, to pay the CEO as much as they want. They do not answer to the workers in any way. They only answer to themselves. They are a gang of greedy kings. So what happens if we actually ask the people what they think? In 2014, in a series of surveys, respondents from 40 countries estimated a ratio of between 6 to 41 to 1 between CEOs and average worker, an ideal ratio of between 4 to 6 to 1, while the reality was 40 to 351 to 1. The high outlier is the USA. That means people want CEOs to make maximum 6 times more than the average worker, not 350 times. The 15th lie. People in rich countries are more entrepreneurial. Capitalism tells us that we need to have entrepreneurship, to start businesses, to innovate, in order to have a rich country. The truth is, people in poor countries are by necessity more entrepreneurial than those in rich countries. On the streets of poor countries, you will see people of all ages selling everything you can think of. In many poor countries, you can buy a place in the queue for the visa section of the American embassy. It's sold to you by professional queuers. You can buy the service to watch your car, meaning refrain from damaging your car, in street parking spots. You can buy the right to set up a food stall on a particular corner, perhaps sold by the corrupt local police boss. Or you can even buy a patch of land to beg from, sold to you by the local thugs. These are all products of human ingenuity and entrepreneurship. So why are poor countries poor and rich countries rich? It is because in rich countries, entrepreneurship has become a collective endeavor. The complexity of today's economy requires the collaboration of a huge network of specialists and creative people that have no choice but to interact with each other to develop successful products and services. No business genius can build a business empire all by himself. A brilliant idea may come from the brain of one person, but it will never become a business if it does not become part of a network of collaborators. Fake paper geniuses like Musk, Bezos, Zuckerberg, and Gates are the richest of the rich only because capitalism has allowed them to sit at the top of the pyramid of exploitation. Thousands of workers below them have the ideas, but the geniuses at the top are called the entrepreneurs and reap the benefits. Does this feel like a fair system to you? The 16th lie. We can trust the market. We are told that we have to leave the market alone because the market knows best. Governments cannot tell buyers and sellers what they can do or cannot do. The agents on the market, they know best what is in their interest. The truth is, nobody on the market really knows what they are doing because nobody can know all the variables that need to be considered before buying or selling something like a stock. We have what is called bounded rationality. Take the example of two supposed brilliant economists, Robert Merton and Myron Scholes. They were awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1997 for their new method to determine the value of derivatives, which in the language of regular people means the price of sophisticated financial contracts. They were so popular that they were invited to help manage famous hedge funds like the Long-Term Capital Management (LTCM), the Platinum Grove Asset Management (PGAM), and the Trinsum Group. Hedge funds are no different than gambling on horse races. These three hedge funds all went bankrupt because the geniuses Merton and Scholes could not predict the crash of the market. If they don't know, who can know? Then we have an actually smart person, Herbert Simon. He was smart in the sense that he realized that we do not have the capacity to know everything. So in order to make sense of the world and not go crazy with too many choices, according to Simon, we deliberately restrict our freedom of choice. We leave out things that are too complex and many problems we have to deal with. This theory is called bounded rationality. For this precise reason, freedom on the market must be severely restricted, if not abolishing some markets altogether, like the stock market, the stupidest of them all. If left unchecked, the stock market will always fluctuate in and out of crisis, ruining the livelihood of millions of people in the process. The 17th lie. More education makes a country richer. We are told that we must get a serious and good education in order to have a good job. An educated workforce is a must for strong economic development. The truth is, knowledge was always important for economic growth, from aqueducts in ancient Rome to gunpowder in China in the 11th century to colonialism, the industrial age, and now the digital age. Knowing how to do better things always meant more power and more growth. However, today, more education does not translate into more productivity. It is impossible to use a master's in medieval literature to increase the revenue of an advertising agency or the number of cars produced by Tesla. In 1960, Taiwan had a literacy rate of only 54%, while the Philippines had a rate of 72%. Despite its lower educational level, Taiwan has since then pulled one of the best economic growth performances in human history, while the Philippines has done rather poorly. Today, Taiwan's per capita income is around 10 times that of the Philippines. Productivity of manufacturing has increased significantly in the past 40 years. This means less qualified workers are required to produce the same number of goods. This created a paradox. On one hand, there are jobs that do not require much education. These jobs cannot further increase much in productivity because they have a natural maximum limit to how productive they can get. These are jobs like moving boxes in an Amazon facility, stacking shelves in supermarkets, or services like haircutting. There's only so much hair a fast scissor hand can cut in a day. On the other hand, there are jobs that do require a lot of education. The competition for these high-skill, high-education jobs has become fiercer and more challenging. A generation ago, a bachelor's degree would have been enough to qualify you for a skilled job. Now you need at least a master's or a PhD. The high-skilled jobs are fewer and fewer, which makes them incredibly difficult to get. Overall, current generation is more educated than ever, which is an incredibly good thing. However, capitalism does not offer enough skilled jobs with good salaries for all highly skilled, educated candidates. This mess and contradictions between education and available jobs has not made us richer. It has only made a handful of people stupendously rich. The 18th lie. What is good for a company is good for the nation. We are told that without a strong private corporate sector, We cannot have a dynamic economy. What is good for business is good for the nation. Governments must give maximum freedom to corporations. The truth is, the more freedom we give to corporations, the more disaster they make, for the simple reason that the profit motive, which is at the heart of capitalism, is so narrow in vision it wants to grow fast and large without consideration for any damaging side effects. If it weren't for regulation and government intervention, we would have been destroyed already, and that may still happen. Let us quickly look at some examples. General Motors became the largest car maker in America by 1958. It grew so much that Charles Wilson, a former CEO for GM, told Congress that what is good for America is good for General Motors and vice versa. But not all countries felt the same, that the well-being of giant corporations is important for the well-being of the nation. Business was generally viewed with suspicion. Regulations were everywhere to protect social justice, worker rights, and small business. This happened not just in communist countries who saw private property as the source of great evils, but even in capitalist countries. Between the 1930s and the 1980s, Finland classified enterprises with more than 20% foreign ownership officially as dangerous enterprises for the nation. Other countries, especially France, Austria, Singapore, Taiwan, used state-owned enterprises intensively to promote key industries. However, since the 1970s, the narrative changed. Somehow, the countries convinced themselves that what is good for business is good for the national economy. Taking advantage of these pro-business feelings, the chemical manufacturing DuPont Corporation has released perfluorooctanoic acid, the infamous PFOA, at their West Virginia plant into the air and Ohio River from the 1950s until the early 2000s, causing severe illness and death to the local population. It took enormous courage and dedication from many people to stop DuPont and make them pay. In 2017, DuPont settled 3,550 personal injury claims related to the pollution scandal in the West Virginia plant for $671 million. Oh, and by the way, General Motors went bankrupt in 2009. Government had to take over the company and spend over $50 billion of taxpayer money to restructure it. Companies are not nations and should never be nations. The 19th lie. We do not live in planned economies. We are told that only individuals and companies who are looking to make a profit can make a prosperous modern economy. Central planning by the government must stay out of the economy. The truth is, in capitalist economies, there's a lot of planning going on. I mean a lot. It's just a bit different than communist central planning. Without capitalist planning, there is no investment, no research, and no development, no infrastructure, and no fighting wars. In the Second World War, the capitalist economies of America, the UK, Germany, were all centrally planned. That is called indicative planning. It's government telling the private sector what to produce and how much. We also have capitalist state-owned companies. And yes, there are plenty of those. They are essential for the economy. They operate mostly in infrastructure, railways, roads, ports, airports, or essential services like water, electricity, postal service, and even in manufacturing or finance, like public pension boards in Canada. Probably the most underreported fact is that about 20 to 50% of technological research and development is funded by the government in capitalist countries. America is one of the most planned economies in this regard. From 1950 to 1980, it funded between 47% and 65% of all research and development. Of course, there's a lot of planning inside companies too. Imagine what would happen if a CEO came to work and said, "There's no need for a plan. Let us trust our instinct and take one day at a time." Capitalism says it has little or no planning simply as a tool of propaganda to prove itself that is the opposite of communism and that it is better than communism. Was communism bad because it had too much planning or because it had bad planning and no democracy? But that's another story. The 20th lie. Equality of opportunity is fair. Capitalism tells us that if all things are considered equal and we get the same start in life, it is fair to reward more those with more talent and more effort. But it is not fair to have affirmative action, to admit students of lower qualities simply because they are black or poor. The truth is, equality of opportunity is not enough. We need also a decent amount of equality of outcome too. If a child is hungry, she will not concentrate in school, even if the school is free. Equality of outcome means having a minimum decent standard of living for all families on which you can build the equality of opportunity. If we as a society do not have a minimum standard, opportunity means almost nothing. For example, we could give a universal basic income to every adult citizen. Let's say $2,000 per month, free money for life, as it's suggested in Canada. Yes, there's money for that. On top of an UBI, we can leave society open to equality of opportunity, in which every child and adult is free to build their own life based on their individual merit, talent, and ambition. Many studies show that a universal basic income will not make people lazy and will incentivize them to work better and in meaningful jobs they actually enjoy more than the bullshit jobs many of them do currently have. Just like we are a product of both nature and nurture, we need to balance equality of opportunity with equality of outcome. The 21st lie. Big government is bad. When capitalists talk about big government, they mostly talk about the welfare state. They say the rich are taxed unfairly in order to pay for the unemployment, healthcare, and other benefits of the poor, who are just lazy peasants who do not want to make an effort in life. The truth is, a good welfare state encourages people more to switch careers, learn more, find better jobs, and in general be open to change. With a universal basic income, for example, people will not rush into precarious survival jobs, will take more time to learn new skills, or think better about what kind of work is meaningful for them. Welfare is a common good that gives people more peace of mind when they navigate the ocean of choices and risks. A sad example of what happens with a small welfare state is Korea. In 1997, Korea abandoned the paternalistic economic system, dropped the welfare state, and switched to free market economics. Job security was reduced, pushing 60% of workers into jobs without a permanent contract. This forced the young generation to hunt for careers of apparent more stability like medicine and engineering that caused severe stress for an entire generation. As Dan Price, the famous unorthodox capitalist CEO, recently wrote, "I don't know who doesn't get this still, but unemployment isn't a welfare handout. It's insurance that workers pay into every check." You wouldn't say socialist giant car insurance company Geico bailed your lazy ass out after someone hits your car. Evidence shows that countries with bigger governments can grow faster. Until the 1980s, America grew much more slowly than Europe, despite the fact that it had a much smaller welfare state. In 1980, public social expenditure as a share of GDP was only 13.3% in America compared to 19.9% for the EU's 15 countries. The two fastest growing economies in the core OECD group during the post-1990 period were Finland, 2.6% growth, and Norway, 2.5%, both with a large welfare state. In 2003, the share of public social spending in GDP was 22.5% in Finland and 25.1% in Norway. Whether it is correlation or causation and other factors considered, these facts still stand. Welfare is good for all people and all nations. The 22nd lie. Financial markets are efficient. We are told the financial markets need to be left alone to become as efficient as possible because the prosperity of the nation depends on this. The truth is, financial markets have become too efficient at making innovations. They caused three major economic crashes in the last 20 years alone. We are still in the last one. There's too much money floating around that have no connection with the real economy, and this is causing significant more harm than good. According to a calculation based on IMF data by Gabriel Palmer, the ratio of financial assets to GDP in the UK reached 700% in 2007. That's 7 times more financial assets than real stuff created in the economy. Jim Crotty, an American economist, calculated that the ratio of financial assets to GDP in the US fluctuated between 400% and 500% between the 1950s and the 1970s, but started shooting up from the early 1980s with financial deregulation to break through the 900% by the early 2000s. A financial asset is not real money. It can be only a claim, like a contract, that somebody has on a real asset, like a house, that is known as a mortgage. These claims can be bought and sold, multiplied and bundled inside each other, layers upon layers like an onion. The onion can grow exponentially and loses any connection to the original asset, the house. When the onion gets too big, it explodes. Banks go bankrupt and people lose their houses. Financial products are good only if they help a real economy with real people, things, and services. Financial products are good in essence when they can move quickly from place to place in order to stimulate the development of sustainable businesses. It is easier to move money around than houses or factories. But when finance becomes its own enormous universe, an incomprehensible abstraction, it becomes so damaging to people and nature that it's capable of destroying civilization as we know it. From taxes on transactions, to wealth taxes, to taxing the stocks the rich own, to the eradication of fiscal paradises, finance must be tamed and brought back to the real world. The 23rd lie. We need good economists to have good policies. We often hear that government officials are not trained well in economics. They don't understand the complex needs of each industry. They need to stick to free market policies and let companies make their own rules. The truth is, good economists are not required to make good economic policies. During their miracle years, economic policies in Japan and to a lesser extent in Korea were run by lawyers. In Taiwan and China, economic policies have been run by engineers. Since 1980, the influence of free market economists, mostly coming from the so-called Austrian school, has resulted in poor economic performances all over the world, lower growth, economic instability, and severe inequality. No mainstream economist saw the coming 2008 crisis. Economist Tim Besley and historian Peter Hennessy said in a letter to the Queen that it was a failure of the collective imagination of many bright people to understand the risks to the system as a whole. Economists had been partially guilty for creating the conditions of the 2008 crisis, the 1982 third world debt crisis, the 1995 Mexican peso crisis, the 1997 Asian crisis, and the 1998 Russian crisis, by providing theoretical justifications for financial deregulation and pursuit of profits. Capitalism has forgotten, conveniently, that there are very good and well-developed alternatives to mainstream economists. Certainly, the right kind of good economists are needed so policymakers can execute the transition from capitalism to a new economic system that allows us to live in harmony with the planet and with each other. The 24th lie. Capitalism has lifted billions of people out of poverty. This is probably the first lie capitalism tells in its defense. You have probably heard stories like these. Charles Kenny, an economist who worked at the World Bank, published in 2015 Getting Better: Why Global Development is Succeeding, with a glowing foreword by Bill Gates. Gates himself wrote in 2014, by almost any measure, the world is better than it has ever been. And the beloved Swedish statistician Hans Rosling continued to make his earnest presentations with shiny visual gimmicks illustrating how the plight of the poor keeps improving. Rosling's TED Talk, The Best Stats You've Ever Seen, has been viewed more than 15 million times. As Jason Hickel, an economic anthropologist, wrote, the World Bank defined the international poverty line to earning $1.02 per day in 1990. In 2000, they moved it to $1.08 per day. In 2008, it went to $1.25 per day. 400 million people were no longer poor just from a stroke of a pen. Here's the trick. While the new poverty line looks slightly higher than the old one, in reality it was just rebased to new purchasing power parity calculations, PPP, which are updated every few years to compensate for depreciation in the purchasing power of the dollar. People in 2008 bought less things with $1 than people bought in 1990 with $1. What if we measured global poverty at a minimum of $5 per day? We would find the global poverty headcount to be about 4.3 billion people. At $10 per day, we would have 5.1 billion people live in poverty today. Since 1981, 2 billion people were added, not removed, to the ranks of the poor. According to a study from the Rand Corporation, even in rich America from 1975 to 2020, the top 1% of Americans have taken $50 trillion from the bottom 90% in the forms of unequal and unfair distribution of income. That is $1,144 every month, every single year for 45 years. Stolen. In real terms, capitalism has not made us richer. It has made us poorer. The 25th lie. Capitalism is democratic. Capitalism has told us that it made society more democratic, more open, more just for everybody. The truth is, unfortunately, very bleak. We may have a better deal of political democracy than previous generations. Political democracy has evolved not because of capitalism, but in spite of capitalism. We can vote who can represent us in government, but we have almost zero democracy at the workplace. Workers cannot elect managers and directors on the board like they elect politicians. Workers cannot fire managers and directors like they vote politicians out of office. The workplace of most companies is essentially a tyrannical, feudal-like system. There's a king at the top, the CEO, and an entire pyramid of unelected lords below the king. The king tells the lords what to do, and the lords trickle down those decisions to the peasants at the bottom that have no choice but to obey the commands. If the peasants don't like it, they have the freedom to become unemployed or the freedom to go work for another pyramid of kings and lords. Democracy is about self-determination, having a sense that you are listened to, that your opinion and choice matter. It is the power of the people to allow their representatives to govern on their behalf. So if we democratically elect a few people to govern our civic life through the mechanisms of political democracy, why don't we elect people to govern our economic life? We spend more than a third of our day at work, if not more. We need to be able to elect and fire our bosses and directors on boards just like we elect our politicians. If you don't like the S word, that is socialism, we can call it something else. But do not freak out. We are not talking about soul-crushing, freedom-quashing, poverty-stricken, North Korea-style socialism. We can call it economic democracy, but I think the word socialism is okay too. This video was a marathon introduction into the big lies of capitalism. The list is based on the book 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism by Ha-Joon Chang, to which I added my commentary and more recent sources. There are many more issues we will need to deal with. The climate is collapsing before our eyes, and capitalism is the guilty party. We need to act now. In future videos, I will talk in more detail about some of the issues and some of the solutions. If you find these videos informative, valuable, or helpful, please support me on Patreon at patreon.com/Vlad Bunea. Every dollar counts. It helps me live and cover the expenses of production and research. I promise I will never read ads on YouTube. I will rely 100% on your support and virtual companionship. Until next time, stay strong.